Welcome to Done Pretending, the podcast where healing meets authentic living. I am your host, Susan Houston, storyteller, mentor, and believer in the power of truth to set us free. This is your sanctuary for the soul, a safe space where we peel back the layers of judgment and fear to uncover the beauty of living real. Each week, you'll hear stories of courage, resilience, and transformation that remind you it's never too late to become who you were created to be. Welcome back, friends, to Done Pretending. I'm Susan Houston, your host. I am really excited today to talk to Shannon Darrow. She speaks about something that is near and dear to my heart. Having gone through divorce, having put off a divorce for many years so that I would not have my kids go through something traumatic. She works on diving into all of these subjects. She's the host of the In Between Them. It's a podcast that explores the long shadows of childhood divorce through the unfiltered stories of adults who've lived through it. I lived through a divorce as a kid, and Shannon is just a gift. She's from Orange County, California. She earned her law degree at San Diego, and then before spending 2 decades in the golf industry. So you went from law degree to golf industry. That's going to be an interesting question. And you now live in Oregon, where you work as a certified divorce coach and mediator. And that is such an important job, because what you're doing is you're helping guide families through one of life's hardest transitions, both legally and from the human element of that. So, Shannon, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. Okay, so first of all, I have to ask, how did you end up in the golf industry after law?
So it's kind of I'll make it very short. I graduated from law school, and I was very close to my grandmother, who also lived in San Diego. And she passed away about a week before I took the bar exam. And if anyone knows the bar exam, you sit for like 2 months and study 40, 50 hours a week, and you do nothing else but that. And then you take this 3-day exam. And I have no memory of taking it. It was just out of body. So I did my best. I passed one half, didn't pass the other half. And then, of course, when I got the results 3 months later, didn't pass the bar. So decided I would take it again. But at that point, I had to get a job. I had to start paying back my law school loans. And so a lawyer who I had worked for in undergrad in Arizona knew this guy who was looking for a salesperson in Southern California. And she contacted me, and I said, sure, I'll try it. I have to make some money. And as long as they know I'm going to take the bar, I'll do that. And it was a startup in the golf business. And I had always wanted to do transactional business law. So for me, being a part of a startup that then went on to be acquired by the Golf Channel and NBC, and then I went back for another. And anyways, so I started doing that, and I was making money and having the best time going to golf courses and just being in that world, that I just kept doing it.
I love that.
There was a lot of legal elements to it, writing contracts, negotiating sales deals. So there was some of it that I was using. And I think I enjoyed life a little more than a first year, second year, early on law associate.
Well, and I think you were put exactly where you were supposed to be, both for yourself internally, but also you fulfilled the need for them. And you had the law background that I'm sure just, made their life so much easier.
Yeah. Well, it was a kind of a built-in credibility, even though I had no idea what I was doing from a sales perspective. I didn't golf at the time.
Yeah.
So it was just like, well, this girl's probably smart enough. So we'll give it a try,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So now you have your podcast, The In Between Them. Tell me how that came about.
Okay. It's kind of my story on how I got into coaching and mediation as well. So I'll make it
Yeah.
as clear and brief as possible because it's long.
Ouch.
So in the course of my golf industry career, I got married, I got divorced with a 3-month-old baby, and have navigated that through the last 13 years. And in the course of that process, I think with my legal background, I just kind of kept thinking this shouldn't be so hard, and
Mhm.
um in the course of that too, as you know, when you go through something, people always refer their friends to you or connect people to you. So I found
Yeah.
myself kind of informally coaching people, referring people to things I knew about that I had discovered through my journey. And then through that, I had started to think, if I had been in a situation where I could have mediated my divorce, wow,
Mm.
that would have been so much better.
Mhm.
And so I didn't think mediation first. I found this woman who kind of worked with independent coaches. And so she took me on and I got certified in all of that. But then I wanted to do more that was a little bit more guiding of to the end result versus just coaching people along the way.
Mhm.
And so I looked into mediation, and that is then what I ended up doing in multiple different training sessions. I really focused on child custody and family mediations. And then through that, which is rewarding in and of itself, but I get frustrated that you can't get through to parents in the way that you want to when they're in the midst of a divorce because there's so much emotion going on.
Mhm.
And also, everybody says, this is in the child's best interest, or keep the children first, or this is child centered. And I kept seeing that no, that actually is not what is materializing. It is, in a lot of cases, just a war between two people that are trying to preserve and save themselves. And then their kids are in there too, and they're telling themselves that it is in the child's best interest, the different decisions that they're making. And I believe they are very well intended. Um, but I don't think that people realize the ramifications of divorce in so many little ways. And so I literally sat up one night and said to my husband, I think I need to talk to adults who were children of divorce. I don't know how else to get that perspective
Mhm.
because I can't go talk to 12 and 13 and 15-year-old kids, not to mention the reflection is very important because it connects pieces that they're not going to see when they're young.
Yeah.
And so that's how it was born. I just thought maybe if parents can hear these perspectives in those moments, their motivation will be bigger. It will be more intentional around their kids because now they've heard what all these little things are going to do to their children.
Yeah. I really love that you're in this space because having gone through it on both ends, as a child and then as an adult, um, what are you hearing from the adults? What's their biggest takeaways or what's affected them the most from their divorce of their parents?
What has shocked me is how minute some of the things that have affected them actually are.
Hmm.
Where I think, gosh, as a parent, I wouldn't have thought of that myself because the kid's lens and what they're seeing, and then the way they're explaining that to themselves is completely different than
Yeah.
the way that adults are acting. So I think what's surprising me is all the little ways that kids are impacted that it's not even on anybody's radar. But for example, there was a woman whose father was getting remarried, and the stepsister was sitting on his lap like one day. So it was the daughter, stepsister, dad, and new girlfriend. And dad was just trying to make the little girl comfortable, like, we're all together in this as a new family type of thing. And the little girl, the biological daughter, looked at that like, wow, okay, so now I'm at war with this little girl. I get
Mhm.
no less attention from my dad. She's totally taking my place. So many of the things that she saw and felt and told herself in that one moment of another little girl just sitting there, just coming into their family. But that's not at all what the dad intended, you know? So it's something like that, that's this minor little thing, but it changed the trajectory of that relationship for
Mm.
that little girl at the time. But you know, I would say the biggest takeaway, which is something that shouldn't be shocking because it's pretty much written into every judgment in terms of be cordial with your ex, or yeah, with your ex, with your co-parent. Don't talk badly, you know, in front of what does it say in a lot of, you know, no disparaging comments about the other party, whatever, however
Right.
your lawyer or lawyers write it up. But the significance of that is lost the second somebody reads it, to me
Yes.
and what I've witnessed. And
Agree.
I had a woman that I spoke with that had such a difficult time after her parents separated. They lived in the projects. She was in a women's shelter with four other siblings and her
Mm.
mother, all of these things. She's a beautiful human. What she's done is amazing, but she had this really difficult transition out of her parents' marriage. And when I asked her at the end, what of all of these things would you change? She said, I just wish my parents would have talked badly about each other. And
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, that,
Yeah.
that, you know, it's the last thing I would have thought, which would have been the biggest thing to her. And that is definitely the through line, is what kids hear, what they see in body language, how they see just a completely disconnected, non-united front, no alignment between parents. Um, there's so many examples. I would definitely say that that is the biggest takeaway, is how critical it is for these parents to set themselves aside and do what is right for the children, which means don't say anything about the other parent. And you don't have to go so far, I think, as to be buddies, to, you know, but
Right.
examples of all these kids, they have senior nights in high school,
Mhm.
and their parents cannot even stand in a photo with them to take a picture of them, you know, and so just things like that. There's no awareness around the fact that this is your childhood. This is their memory that they are going to live with forever. And their senior night memory is the fact that their parents couldn't even set their emotions aside to stand in a photo with their, in front of their school, in front of their peers, you know? So there's so much in that. There's so many takeaways, but that to me really is the number one, that parents have to understand that none of that is healthy. It always backfires. It's damaging the parent who's talking badly. It's damaging their relationship with the child. Their
Mhm.
intent to try and say whatever they want about the other parent is actually, it's probably working, but in not the way that a parent is intending. And
Yeah.
it's incredibly unfortunate that it's done over and over and over.
Well, and I think it happens sometimes. I think we try and lead with the best intention as parents, um, to not be the person who talks badly.
Mhm.
But kids do overhear all the frustration, all the, I have 2 adult daughters, and when I initiated the divorce, I told them, I said, "Look, I do not ever want to come between you and your dad. I want you to have your own relationship." Um, and I had a mentor at the time tell me, he goes, "Susan, you guys have raised these children together. You're going to have grandkids together. And you need to act like you want it to be." So what that meant for me was Thanksgiving, I invited him and his brother over, and we sat as a family. And same with Christmas. I'm trying to rise above
Mhm.
any animosity or anything like that. But that's difficult to do when you don't get it on the other side. And so, I just keep reminding myself, all I can control is me. Um, it's really interesting talking to my adult daughters too, because they have very different perspectives of our whole relationship. When I told them, and they're in their mid to late 20s now, my youngest daughter her comment to me was, "It's about time." My oldest daughter was flabbergasted, never saw it coming, and very deeply hurt. And it took me a while to really unpack that and talking to them. And what I realized is my oldest daughter had moved out for college and had never returned. My youngest daughter had spent 7 years in the house during those last 7 years and saw things that my oldest daughter never really experienced. So that to me was interesting as well.
Yes, I've only talked to one pair of siblings, but a lot of people reference their siblings.
Hmm.
And it's very, it's a very distinct impact on each child
Hmm.
differently,
Yeah.
depending on gender, depending on age. There's people that their sibling is 8 years younger or 8 years older. It's, to your point, it's a totally different situation when one child is with a parent longer or through something that the other child doesn't see. Um, it's when you were saying that about your having Thanksgiving and Christmas and setting aside the animosity and trying, there are lots of people that say before one of their parents passed away,
Hmm.
their parents finally were able to come together. So 10 years, 5 years, in like the last decade of a parent's life, the two parents were actually able to show up together or be
Hmm.
there for Thanksgiving or something. And I can sense the sadness of, gosh, you guys could have gotten there a lot, much earlier.
Yeah.
And to your point, we could have had both grandparents there for things instead of, we got to go to my
Right.
dad's and then we got to go to my mom's. And it's interesting too. I don't talk to I try to talk to people whose parents were divorced when they were under 18,
Mm.
because to me, the impacts are different.
Yeah.
However, there is a huge grouping of people that are, you know, just young adults whose parents get divorced. That's a whole nother thing.
Hmm.
And I think they're impacted very differently, but
Yeah.
also very impacted. You actually lived this whole life with your parents, and now all of a sudden you have to go to different places. And then when you get married and then you have children, now you're splitting all of that time. And so I'm sure that's a whole nother um, frame of reference that isn't captured in a lot of the people I'm talking about, because I'm talking about kids primarily who had to go back and forth, didn't have a sense of control in what was going on. And the adult child, but young adult child of divorce, I think is a very different it's a very different aspect of it as well that could probably be explored also.
Oh, I'm sure. You just mentioned something about the child not having any control. And one of the things that I talk about a lot is this secondhand doubt that is it's our limiting belief system. And what I'm really learning is that it's a trauma. It's not the act of the trauma that happened. It's the biological feeling that our bodies created. And when we get triggered and these limiting beliefs start playing in our head, it's that same biological response that we've had. And have the kids talked about, the kids to adults talked about how some of those feelings translate into their adult life and how it's affecting them as an adult?
So just to clarify, you're talking about their kind of sense of limiting beliefs that are built into them in that childhood.
Probably from the divorce, from feeling unsafe or feeling out of control or feeling a sense of security. Yeah.
Yes, there is. There are so many things that they connect into adulthood. Many of them end up getting divorced also, but then I would say a lot of them are in a second marriage that is much healthier. So what I don't know, and I'm sure there's research on, but they seem to be impacted in ways that gets them into a first marriage, where then they go, wait a second, I'm living what I saw. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So then they get out of that. They kind of get clarity, whether that's through therapy, growth, whatever they're doing, and they enter a second marriage that is healthier because they've processed, it played out so much more personally than what they lived through, there are safety, self-worth. There's a lot of self-worth issues because I think that the way that children then bond with each parent can be so impacted in an unhealthy situation. Think of, there might be two parents that are good parents together, but when you separate them, their weaknesses show. So if parents are not aware of their weaknesses, then those just manifest to that child. So if, it can go both ways. I don't want to be gender specific in terms of dads all can't do this well and moms do this great type of thing. It definitely flips from time to time, but I would say generally speaking, maybe a dad who is, not planning all the play dates and doing all the grocery shopping and knows what's going on at school. And he just is happy to show up where he needs to be, but he's not doing all the details to get it there, to get the child there. So then if he's in charge of kind of that side of the life now for his kid when he has his children, maybe some of that gets forgotten. Maybe it gets overlooked. Maybe he missed that school email because he's traveling for work. I mean, there's a million different reasons, and moms are the same. You can have moms that are very busy. They've got careers. And so together they worked really well, but separately things fall through the cracks. And so I spoke to a person who dad was a good dad, but he just wasn't on top of it. He wasn't accountable. He missed things. And so what she took from that was, I'm just not as important to him. I'm not. And then what a kid does with that is why, they don't know why. So then they're filling that in. So growing up as an adult, they are seeking validation. They're seeking acceptance. They're seeking attention. They're seeking all of these things because for whatever reason, very much unintentional, people are only capable what they're capable of. And so, yes, there's a lot of people pleasers that are coming out of this, that are realizing that into adulthood, that I've seen many people recognize that a lot of their adult difficulties stem from being people pleasers because they didn't want to upset their parents who were already fighting. They didn't want to make the fighting worse. There's a lot of, my parents are fighting, I need to shield my younger siblings. So there becomes that caretaker role, but it also fast forwards their maturity because now they're a caretaker for their younger siblings in a house that is volatile. So there's so many aspects that that adults are connecting. And again, back to the whole reason I do this, if parents could start to understand that these impacts are not impacts on a child, that they, the whole kids are resilient thing, that they just, at some point they get better, they figure it out, they go on and have a fine adulthood. That is not the case. This is creating them in a developmental way that is playing out into their work life, their personal life, their education, their school life, the decisions they make. So these impacts are far reaching. And if they could realize that getting divorced actually changes them, it can change them for good, it can change them for not good. But if you are just completely unaware that it is changing your children. What are
Yeah.
you going to do with that? You know, that's what I'm seeing a lot of, and people are working really hard to undo those things when they're adults.
I would agree with that 100%. And I'm one of those. The divorce that my mom went through, I actually pushed for because it was a volatile situation. It needed to be done. But when you work or talk to some of these people, these kids, now adults, and what does it do to someone when you finally ask them how it felt to be a kid in that situation? What do you see them experience?
Gosh, I think the biggest thing that comes to mind is just the instability.
Mm,
Kids, you know, I think we know that's what kids need. They need stability.
yeah.
And divorce is the biggest shock to the system of not only is everything now unstable, but wow, I can't even rely on my parents being together. So the
Yeah.
shock to the system of just that breakup, I mean, it's why I think when you do research into ACE scores, which are the adverse childhood experiences, death and divorce are pretty neck and neck because
Yeah.
in a way, it is the death of something to these children. And,
Hmm.
you know, depending on their age, I think that also is, it impacts them very differently. But I think instability, what I have noticed from people is where they talk about their parents tried to keep everything else the same, they tended to feel less angst and upset because their school, like if one parent is able to keep the home that they live in so the kids are able to stay in at least that home and that room and none of that changes, they don't change schools, if they are a church family, they keep going to church, that their
Hmm.
play dates and their friend group stays the same, that you don't have parents that now say, well, I'm not taking the kid to soccer on my time, and the kid loves soccer. So now there's this disruption to their extracurriculars. So, however much of the child's whole world stays the same, I think that protects them to a degree on how much they're impacted. For sure.
Do are you able to use this knowledge or translate this knowledge to in mediation or to other mediators to is there a way that you can influence the parents at all?
Gosh, I have so many dreams on how you can impact this. When I got divorced and the long process of my legal battles, and I realized, wow, I spent double, if not more, on legal battles than my parents spent on my wedding.
Mm,
I realized that is what people don't know. Not only that, and I don't want to get too deep into my own personal story, but you know, there were financial ramifications to me that were very severe because of a shared business that my ex-husband, that it didn't go well.
oh,
Um,
yeah.
and so when you start to, and I say these financial pieces because I think people they're more tangible,
Hmm.
but when you realize what the risks are to getting a divorce, how I had I say a kid, an adult
Yeah.
on whose father, and again, not the right thing to do, but whose father basically told the child how much his mother set him back in his financial life because of what he had to pay out, and all of this. And that is very true. You definitely don't need to tell your child that, but
Right.
there is a hit you take. And so when I started realizing that, I thought, gosh, if people just understood that alone. Like, you're in your 20s, you're grinding, you're working hard, you're creating all of this. If you made this decision and really weren't sure, and then you get divorced, you can kiss a lot of that half goodbye,
Yeah.
you know? So just from that financial piece, let alone the children and the life and all of the other pieces. So I think I have seen how it has helped me working with coaching clients and in mediation for sure. I encourage people to listen to the podcast. I try to pick out, when they're my clients, I try to pick out the podcast that might resonate the most with them
Mm.
versus just saying, hey, go listen.
Yeah.
Um, I'm hopeful that there are opportunities to bring this to light in earlier in people's journeys, um, to talk to kids in high school,
Yeah.
not from the angle of, hey, raise your hand here if you're a child of divorce, but more like, as you go forward and are thinking about getting married, these are the pieces that, if you don't think about it in certain ways, this is what your children will have to live with. And nobody gets married thinking, well, if this doesn't work, you
Right.
go into it thinking, this is
Oh,
it,
no, this
you
is
know,
it. I'm
yeah,
not going to be that child. My parents went through
yeah.
it. I'm not going to go through it. Absolutely.
And
100%.
so, I think there's just so many different levels of early education. You think about how we teach kids go through driver ed. It's like, how do you drive a car? We sign contracts for everything in this world, buying a house, all of these things, and we just get married,
Yeah.
you know? And when you see what happens to children of divorce, I think what I'm seeing is there should be a little bit more forward thinking in
Mm.
terms of, is this the right thing for me? How can I do this well? How much education do I need around raising children? Or just thinking, what is my role in this marriage? What is that person's role in this marriage? What does that look like when we start a family? I mean, it's such a loaded question. So to answer your question, yes.
Well, I think if we did that specifically, if we talked about what does it look like when we do have kids? What are our roles? Because what I talk to so many women about is they get in this role of being the perfect wife, the perfect mom, and they lose themselves. But if people in their early years of marriage would just have that discussion, but I think it's also important to keep having that discussion,
Mhm.
because we grow, we change, we have different needs, we have, experiences from our own childhoods that may come up, that it's really important to keep that communication open, between the two spouses. And I think that, and understanding all the ramifications of, if we don't work on us and this is what we're going to screw a lot of stuff up.
Mhm. I think that the awareness around the impacts,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm trying to think if there's another example in life that is like that, but we go into it, as we should, believing the best, you
Yeah.
know, but it's not a bad thing to also know what the risks are, what the impact could be. And that the people who come from divorced families, I do believe, enter marriage in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean it's the right way, doesn't mean it's a better way. Like I just told you, a lot of them have a first marriage that doesn't work. But I
Yeah.
do think that if they're at all willing to self-reflect, eventually they get to a relation where they are aware they don't want to do the same thing. They
Right.
work really hard
Right.
not to. Um, I think it's a bit of a mind shift in
Mm.
parenting where you have children, therefore you inherently know you are responsible for them.
Yeah.
But there's something that happens when parents go through divorce where it's like that responsibility for them and the responsibility for myself become almost equal. And
Yeah,
I don't know if that's what we should be doing, because I think you have a responsibility to raise children well if you were going to have them, no matter what comes of life, because lots of things can go sideways in life. It's not just divorce, and all of
right.
it impacts kids, but if, they are your responsibility first and foremost. And so being aware of what your actions are doing, and not to go down another rabbit hole, but a lot of the same issues are in married families too. You
Yes.
know, there's
Yes.
a lot of married parents that talk poorly about each other. It has the same impact. We're just focused on people that, should have tried to do better because they already kind of did one thing that was really hard. But it's, that's a conversation to be had in general in
Oh
terms of,
gosh.
you know, the way
I
we're parenting
agree.
and talking. Yeah.
Do you ever think, is there such a thing as a good divorce for kids? And if there is, what does it require of the parents?
I think uh, when two people, and I have talked to people who have done this, can decide from the moment they're getting divorced, we're not going to make this harder on our child. So we're going to do whatever we can do to make this easy. We're going to be a united front as much as we possibly can. We're going to eat crow where we have to because we might want to fight about something, but we're not going to. And we're going to communicate with that child in age appropriate ways, or those children. So, you know, um, if you don't like something that's going on, you can say to the child, I don't particularly like that this happened. Or let's say you actually, kind of to your point, you can mean well. Let's say I say something bad about the other parent, and I try really hard not to, but I just did. Actually then saying to the child, I am sorry that I said that. I shouldn't have said that. I try really hard to, just show you that we're all here for you, and really just owning your mistake, calling it out, and then moving on. I would say communication between the parents and then to the child when age appropriate and necessary, so
Hmm.
that they're not filling in those gaps on their own, so that, that they feel they can talk to each other. I
Yeah.
have a really great podcast coming out with a woman who she has she has done her divorce because of her childhood in the most gracious way I've ever seen. And
Wow.
she said, that does not mean that I have not cried on the floor, that I have not yelled and screamed to my friends, but my daughter has no idea. And she goes, and I know that my ex probably is like, oh, we have to talk about this again or whatever, but we made the decision that we were not going to further impact our daughter because we decided not to be married anymore. And it's a beautiful story. I I
Wow. I can't
I
wait to hear that.
it's amazing what people can do when they just try.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to be, I hate the word cordial because it's just overused in these legal documents of marriage, but that's just what it is. You don't have to be best friends. You actually get the benefit of, I get to leave. I can take this senior photo and smile and be happy for my kid, and then I get to leave this high school gym and go away from my spouse that I don't want to be around. But in
Yeah.
that 5-minute moment, I can just be a human, and be
And
happy for
that's
my kid.
exactly how I've approached it, even with my adult kids, is I can have them over for dinner and we can be pleasant and laugh
Mhm,
and even bring up memories, when the kids
mhm.
were little. But then I either leave or he can leave.
Right.
And it's like, whew, okay. And I talk a lot on my podcast about putting women who wear masks. And there's a difference between wearing a mask and losing yourself.
Mhm.
And then fulfilling, being, like you said, cordial, or fulfilling a moment of time that isn't permanent. You're choosing at that moment to be pleasant, to be insightful, to be respectful. And that is very different than losing yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
If people could look at it like, okay, this is really hard for me to do. And I lived that out, in my own personal situation. It was very hard for me to be around my son's father for a long time. And this has illuminated to me a lot of things that I wish I did better or differently.
Yeah.
I am a example of being in that emotional fog and making decisions that felt right, seemed right, were right. Maybe they were wrong, could have done them differently. I can only control my side of the street, so that's a
Right.
factor as well. But if I could have looked at things and thought, my behavior in this moment is a gift I'm giving to my child, I truly believe I would have done things differently. But that is a mind shift that I had to work to get to
Yeah.
for a decade,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
that's, kind of to your point in women unmasking, and really anyone, you have to be willing to do the work to get
Mm.
to the place where you can then look back and go, wow, I was wrong. Wow, I was right. All of this was hard. What can I take from it? How can I be better?
Mm-hmm.
But that journey, that walk is not for the faint of heart. But
No.
we do it for ourselves and for our children,
Right.
because I'm a better mom if I'm a better person, as hard as that is. And
Mm-hmm.
when you look back, it's like, I don't recognize who I was 15 years ago, but
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
okay. I wouldn't be here if I hadn't gone through it all.
Well, I always say that life is our lives are like chapter books, right?
Mhm.
Every chapter is building for the next part of the story. And I think that I look back at who I was even during the marriage, and there are a lot of times I wasn't proud of it. But now I have the self awareness and have done some of that hard work, like you've said, to where I can dig a little bit deeper
Mhm.
and understand it more.
Mhm. I think
So,
that's sorry, but that understanding, I think, is what kind of makes it all come together, where you see the pieces connect. You see, you wouldn't be this way if you hadn't done whatever it was. And I think for the kids and the people on my podcast that are telling these stories, they're seeing those through lines on what connects that they didn't see before. And
yeah,
it's actually helping them process and understand in a way that they hadn't, and I think that's really, if they can get something out of sharing their story, which they think they're doing it for others, but if they can get something out of it, what a beautiful thing that is for everyone.
absolutely. So, Shannon, if there was one thing that the child that maybe has gone through this, or the child of someone that you love, if they could hear one thing from this conversation, what do you think it would be?
So to the child that's going through it,
Yeah. Or as an adult now.
gosh, I
Really what I'm thinking of is, if the child who's going through it, or you know someone who's got a child going through divorce, and maybe their parents aren't this respectful, great team of parents that they have chosen to be. What is there anything, as maybe an aunt or a grandparent or a close friend, what's one thing that we could share with the child just to let them know it's all going to be okay?
I think the biggest thing that came to my mind immediately was that none of this is your fault.
Yeah.
I think they harbor so much.
Mm-hmm.
I've spoken to people who have almost taken very drastic measures to themselves to try and correct something that's going on with their parents.
Yeah.
And I think that's it. I don't know if they all realize how much they think it's their fault all the time also,
Mm-hmm.
or how much they think if they, because I think they compartmentalize a lot of the pieces, but what runs through it is, if I take my siblings away, if I don't rock the boat, if I don't do this, if I didn't exist, there wouldn't be an angst around child support. If I didn't have all these needs around my extra, like they see their needs as burdens on their parents that then drive conflict.
Yeah.
And it's mostly because the parents are making them aware of all of that.
It's true. It's
If
true.
you were just parenting and doing all the things for your kids because it's their childhood,
Right.
and
Right.
not, and the
Instead of
kid
making
didn't
them
know
feel
what,
guilty,
right,
all
right.
these things that we've put them into,
Mhm.
but we complain about always having to be on the run, or we're always
Yeah,
running, or things like that. We're
yeah,
the ones who put them there.
right,
Yeah.
right. And so again, it goes back to, you're a parent, you have a level of responsibility. You should be still trying to give your child the best childhood you can under whatever circumstances you live in. Making them feel like they are a burden on your life or your
Mm.
lifestyle or your co-parenting situation is about the last thing that they need to carry in their little childhood, you
Yep.
know?
I love that. Love that. So, um, in listening to everything that we have talked about and having listened to some of your episodes of your podcast, you know, today really isn't about the divorce. It's more about what kids carry when the adults in the room are too overwhelmed to look down and think about how, like you've said, the impact is on them. So
Yep.
thank you so much for this work that you're doing. I think it's so important. And as much as when you're as adults, when you're in the midst of going through this, sometimes you forget to look outside your box and realize who else you're impacting.
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
um, Shannon, I am going to put all of your links in our show notes. And I ask our listeners too, if there's any part of this conversation that has stirred something within you, or would be very impactful for someone that going through this or thinking about divorce, please share it with them. Shannon's contact information will be in the show notes as well, so you can always reach out to her. And thank you, Shannon.
Thank you, Susan. I feel honored to have been here to share this, and
Oh,
I appreciate your time.
absolutely.